Thank you all for coming out. Thank you all for tuning in, those of you that are on Zoom. My name is Jesse Iliff. I'm Executive Director here at Severn River Association. Thank you for coming out to the John Wright Speaker Series. I'm excited about our speaker this evening, the last of 2024, but I will leave the introductions to our board member, Brian. I wanted to give a couple brief updates and some housekeeping reminders. The first reminder is this is a hybrid presentation. So if there are questions in the room, we can repeat them for you so that the Zoom audience can hear through the mic because they won't hear you otherwise. And on that same note, please try to refrain from engaging in a colloquy with the speaker because that means we've got to shuffle the mics around a lot and it gets unwieldy. And if you can, please save your questions for the end. I think that's it on housekeeping notes. A brief update on what's going on at SRA is that we are in the middle. Oh, I'm sorry. There is one other housekeeping note. You'll see on the table in front of you some QR codes where you can give us feedback on the presentation, learn more about SRA, or make a contribution. If anyone in the room is not yet a member of the association, I hope that you will become so. And then the update, back to the updates though, it is grant crunch time season for us. We're putting together 9 proposals that are all due the week after next for various restoration projects throughout the watershed. So keep your fingers crossed for us that we're successful with our proposals. And we are winding down the year as everyone else is. And so if you're on our mailing list, you'll be hearing from us. And if you're not, I hope you'll scan the QR code on the table and join the mailing list. So without any further ado, I'll pass. Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, yes, of course. Our very generous sponsors from Harbor Wine and Spirits and Annapolis Cars have been diamond sponsors for the organization and are making this presentation possible. So thank you to those generous sponsors. And without further ado, Brian.
Good evening, folks. Thank you for being here. See a few current and former board members. Can you raise your hands to be recognized? Thank you all for being out here tonight. Yep. And before I introduce Jennifer, a couple things. Coming up in 2025, we have some speakers coming up, including Tom Weaver and Senator, let me back up, U.S. Senator Sarah Elfreth will be
She's
Congresswoman now. I can't keep up. But once their schedule gets released in the next few weeks, we'll know more about when we can book her in 2025. Okay. Jennifer Wazenski is an environmental and natural resource attorney with more than 30 years experience representing property owners, businesses, and government agencies. She has litigated and advised on many federal and state regulatory programs and led teams of attorneys in the delivery of coordinated and strategic legal services. This presentation will strive to provide community members with a toolkit for effective engagement across the various forums and processes that shape environmental and natural resource decisions at the county and state levels, focusing on strategies and tactics that apply broadly from public hearings and permitting processes to regulatory rulemaking and local planning. Participants will learn how to structure their impact to be organized, strategic, and impactful. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Jennifer Wazenski.
This is fun. Hi, everybody. Thank you for coming tonight. I'm going to be listening to myself behind me for a while. Thanks for coming. I am going to speak to you tonight a little bit about effective environmental advocacy, and just from overhearing some of the conversations you've been having while we've been getting set up, it sounds like there's a lot of experience in the room. So some of these things will be familiar to you, I'm sure. And for those of you who are just sort of starting to get your feet wet or just contemplating getting involved in environmental issues, hopefully this will be helpful for you to know what you're up for. And it's 7:06. The Ravens game starts at, I believe, 8:20. Thank you. We're going to try to get you out on time and appreciate your pre-gaming with us tonight. Let's make sure this is on. So, why are you here? I'm guessing that you all have different backgrounds, but you probably have a few things in common as well. You care about the environment, you want to protect it, and something has brought you to the point where you're ready to act, if you haven't already. It might have been, the 7-Eleven that could affect your local duck pond, or drainage in your community that requires you to retrofit your tot lot with a restoration project. But something has brought you here, and probably something bigger than that in your background. You probably also have a story, as we all do. Maybe it was an experience you had in nature. Maybe it was a community that was threatened with lead in its water. Maybe you just love wildlife. But something in your background has brought you to this point and created an interest to act. So I'll share a little bit, about my story. I started out as a biology major. I went to St. Mary's College of Maryland and thought I would be a fisheries biologist, and had sort of a transformative experience during my senior year when I did an internship with a fisheries lab. And a lot of the work we did was very academic, but we had occasion to interact with DNR on a few issues. And we were actually, as scientists, asked to make decisions. Can we do this? Should we proceed? And a lot of times we didn't have we had the data, but we didn't have the way to translate that into something meaningful or a full understanding of the impact on stakeholders. And in doing that, I really discovered that that was my passion. And it really convinced me that I wanted to go to law school and become an environmental advocate. So what are we talking about? We talk about environmental advocacy. Well, it's broad. It's a broad topic, right? And it conjures up some images like storming the whaling ships or spiking trees, or and a lot of direct actions. But what I really want to focus on here are some of the more some of the tactics and strategies that are focused on public participation. So initially, we're talking about a sort of a suite of actions, and somehow all of these words start with the letter P, as I fashioned them. Publicize, partner, pressure, persuade, and if necessary, prosecute. To do what? To protect the environment and natural resources. And we're aiming at issues, I guess from broadest to narrowest, issues, big issues like climate change and things like that, narrowing down to policies that might affect us more locally, and finally to projects that might be happening in our community that really have driven us to take action. So tonight we're going to focus on universal principles. I think Brian summed it up well. We're going to talk about principles, strategies, and tactics, but universally. We won't be drilling into the Anne Arundel County Code or the environment article, the Maryland Environment article. We'll be talking about principles that apply broadly no matter what setting you're in. We will be emphasizing, as I said, public participation and engagement, mostly in government processes. And we'll share some examples, not just in Maryland, but in this watershed. And I do see this, I know it's a little bit of a challenge because we are online and we have to work with microphones and things like that, but I would like this to be more of a conversation. I know you have had experiences that you might want to share, and you may even have a background in a couple of the things that I'll be speaking about tonight. So Correct me in the moment if you have to, if you have specific knowledge that contradicts what I'm saying, but otherwise, at the end, if we have time, I'd love for you to share some of your experiences as well. As a disclaimer, because I'm a lawyer, I have to tell you, this is not intended to be legal advice. It is for educational purposes and yada, yada, yada. So we're in troubling times right now. If you're an environmentalist, you're probably a little bit concerned about where we're headed, at least at the national level. You might be encouraged locally because we've got a pretty powerful group of local elected representatives and that I think are going to do their best to continue supporting us. But you know, there's always challenges and there's just much to do and not a lot of time to waste. So let's just take a deep breath, gird our loins and press on. Worrying never solved the problem. And I love this Gretchen Rubin quote, anxiety or action is the antidote to anxiety. So what we really need to do is get to work. Let's start with an understanding of the issues, which I know you are going to be familiar to most of you, but historically, we've organized our management of the environment and pollution in particular along the lines of media, air, water, and land. We've also separately managed the conservation of natural resources through another suite of laws that sort of flowed from national legislation, and we find it also trickling down to states and local governments. And more recently, in the last 20 years or so, we've expanded our notion of environmental protection to encompass climate change and energy policy. So who makes all these decisions? We're looking at a deep and broad basis for decision. As you know, you probably learned it in grade school. I have a picture of the image that you're all familiar with. Legislatures are passing laws. The executive branch through administrative agencies are developing the rules of engagement using the authority they've gotten under statutes. And then they're using those rules to make individual decisions on projects and approvals. And finally, if any of these things are subject to challenge, we might end up in court, or we might end up in an administrative hearing office. So administrative agencies are really where the rubber meets the road, whether it's a development project or the construction of a new pollution source, a power plant or a wastewater treatment plant, or a proposed use or alteration of natural resources, whether it's fisheries or forests. Administrative agencies are the frontline deciders. So it's kind of important to understand who they are and how they work. And we won't belabor this because I know these symbols are familiar to most of you. The EPA, the Army Corps of Engineers are going to be our primary decision makers at the federal level with regard to permitting, whether we're looking for permits to construct or operate sources of air emissions, water pollution, waste management. We've got the Army Corps of Engineers that's going to deal with wetlands decisions. We have our two natural resources trustees between the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and NOAA, and certain energy decisions are going to be made by the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, or if we're looking at offshore wind or drilling, we might be looking at the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management. There are, of course, many others. At the state level, administering in many cases delegated programs, we've got the Department of the Environment, which is essentially our state environmental protection agency, and the Department of Resources are sort of have primacy. Or you're kind of struggling to look around the computer there. If we're dealing with transmission or energy generation projects, we might be looking at the Public Service Commission. If we're doing work within 1,000 feet of the bay, we might be going through the Critical Area Commission. And of course, the Department of Planning is going to be imposing some environmental requirements on local governments as they pertain to environmental resources. And I won't read through the long list of agencies in the county, but if you've been through a development project, you know that you'll probably interact with a large number of county agencies, or in the city of Annapolis with the city, on issues from the critical area implementation to well and septic, and all sorts of permits. And on the right side of the screen are the agencies that deal with a lot of the things that SRA is moving into in terms of watershed restoration. especially where those projects are being used to satisfy state requirements for operation of the municipal separate storm sewer program, or the elimination of nutrients and sediment. You might be dealing with the Office of Watershed Protection and Restoration Program, and look for funding from the Resilience Authority. So we're going to be focusing on public participation tonight. And so it helps to understand what that means. And again, it's for those of you who have been involved in these processes, it might be fairly clear, but as a general rule, we're talking about decisions or processes rather, whereby a government body is involving the public in the process of making decisions and considering input, the public's input in making the decision. It's everything from scoping, from coming up with big ideas, either through advisory bodies or through direct public solicitation, to the notice of a proposed rule, the opportunity for you to go in and actually give your input in a hearing or in written comments, to the decision process, and even a right to appeal for certain adversely affected parties. If you've been involved in the process, over a period of time, it's changed radically. I know when I started in government in the early 90s, pretty much everything involved paper. You were mailing a request for information to the government. You were either waiting by your mailbox to get paper copies of things in your mailbox. You might be asking to be put on a physical mailing list for notice of things. And you would be attending hearings and meetings in person, a lot of times very far from where you live. All that's changed, so as you know, and it's been kind of a remarkable transformation that in many ways has democratized a lot of processes that really were only open to and understood by people who worked pretty hard to know what was happening. But the goals of public participation have largely remained the same, and they're driven by law, not just by our interest to be heard. First of all and foremost, it's to inform government decision-making. Governments can't know everything. They operate with what's put before them, either by an applicant or someone opposing it. Another goal is obviously to obtain a favorable decision, to create a record to support a legal challenge. You can't typically, judicial review of decisions is on what they call on the record, on the administrative record. So if you haven't gotten before an administrative agency with evidence that's relevant to the decision, you can't later present that with some limited exceptions. And in some cases in most cases, there's a threshold requirement that you participate in the administrative case in order to complain about it later and to challenge it, what you call standing. So what do regulators want you to know? Well, for 25 years, I represented regulators. And so I know a couple of the things that they want. And I've also had some recent conversations where they've emphasized some of the things that are important to them. They want you to know that they're there to help. And that's kind of a joke, right? We're from the government, we're here to help. But it actually is true. Most people doing that job are there because they really have an abiding interest in helping the public. Most of them have skill sets that would allow them to work in the public sector for a lot more money, but they choose to serve you. They have roles that are defined by law. So if you go to the Department of the Environment complaining about something that is within the purview of local zoning, they might be irritated. They have a lane, and they would like for you to know that you should probably do your best to figure out what that is before you reach out and complain about something. Because they do have a lot on their plate. They've got a lot going on. And so fielding extraneous requests, especially where information is readily available, can be somewhat overwhelming to them. They can only act on relevant information. So a lot of us, when we're concerned about something that's happening, we might be concerned about the traffic associated with a new project that's being planned. We might be concerned about school capacity or any number of things associated with the development. But they can only act on issues that are relevant to them within their purview. So they need for you to present that before they can act on it. And it needs to be information that's within the scope of their jurisdiction. It also has to be of the quality and the nature that they can actually work with. In the environmental area, people frequently take pictures, submit them, which is good. Sometimes they try to collect samples, whether it's water samples or that they think something that looks like sewage or smells like sewage. There are data requirements for them to act on. There are data quality and preservation issues that sometimes prevent that information from being usable. And they want you to know that they work best with people they already know and trust. You know, it's not that no one's going to talk to you about your issue, but it's going to be a lot more persuasive if they hear it from someone who has either worked for government before or appears in their office frequently, and they know them because they know from previous interactions that they can trust and take what they know to what they provide to the bank. They also want you to know that once a legal process is underway, they're forced to follow it. And because of that, the best time to reach out is before something like that happens, before a formal proposal is issued. Now, we can't always do that. A lot of times we find out about projects that have been proposed or rules that have been proposed only after they've been published. But once that happens, the government is locked into a process, right? They can't just make a decision because you have pointed something out to pursue it differently or drop it. They've got to follow the law. Other important truths. There's strength in numbers. It's not that it doesn't matter if only you are affected by that big stream of stormwater that's flowing down the hill, but your message will have a lot more impact if other people are also concerned about the issue. Broad engagement is desirable. If you are taking a position on an issue, and there's a project applicant, you're an opponent, there's a government decision maker, there are other community members who may have a position on the issue. It may be the same as yours. They may have other concerns. It's important to engage broadly with them because most resolutions are not unilateral government decisions. A lot of them are negotiated, and to fully negotiate, you have to involve all parties involved. That resolution can take a lot of time. Best case scenario, everybody gets in a room and you quickly come to a decision, and you can convince the government that it's the right way to go and the process allows it. But often it doesn't. We've got a lot of local examples of issues that have gone on for a decade or more, tied up in different iterations of complaints and project revisions and appeals. So it can be a long haul. And for most projects, you're dealing with multiple decisions, as we suggested before, multiple decisions at multiple levels of government. So again, different decision makers may be involved. And here's an example of that. Just a basic example is a new home that's being built. You'll have a local agency that's reviewing a lot of the issues associated with site development. In the environmental area, it might be in the critical area. Again, if we're looking at like a waterfront home construction, for example, with a pier, you'll have critical area requirements that include forest conservation. You'll have sediment and erosion control, which involves actually two different agencies, one that approves it and one that enforces it. You'll have MDE looking at stormwater issues and wetlands permits and licenses and waterway construction permits. And above that, you'll have if you're dealing in waters of the United States, you'll be dealing with the Army Corps of Engineers on a federal wetlands authorization. So with all of this going on, how do you proceed? And the answer is strategically. Proceeding from broad principles to principled strategies, and within those strategies, very specific actions and tactics. So there are some common broad principles of environmental advocacy that are common to just about every project. First and foremost is your clarity of purpose. you start out with a vision of what you want the world to look like and what you want a project to look like, or if you want a project to go away. Within that purpose is the way in which you frame the issue, hopefully in a manner that that is broad to bring along the maximum number of stakeholders who might support your position, and strategic goals that fit within your vision and which flow sort of logically from the framing of the issue. Next is leveraging your strengths. There's power involved in environmental campaigns, and it could be money, and it could be the number of people that are interested in the issue, and it could be the specific people who are involved in the issue whose opinion carries weight. It's important to have a strong leader as part of an environmental campaign to take your message to decision makers. And it's critical that your actions are timed well, and in keeping with decision-making deadlines, and also potentially timed with funding availability, timed with other events that might captivate the interest of the public. You need resilience, and the most important thing to achieving resilience is acting through groups like the Severn River Association, like your community organizations that have been in place for a long time. The structure that allows people to work together, that allows people to achieve, or rather to agree upon common goals, and to establish the ground rules for how they're going to act and how they're going to adapt to changes in a process. You know, there are a lot of examples, and one in particular that comes to mind is the battle over Crystal Springs Farm in Annapolis, where, again, a battle that's been going on for a decade now, and was spearheaded by some strong leaders in the area, and they accomplished a lot. And that project changed over the course of the decade to constrain the nature of the project, to eliminate certain objections that the vast majority of interested people had. And so a lot of folks are very satisfied with where things have ended up, but a few folks are still pursuing a challenge. I'm guessing that most of those folks started out together. And when groups fracture like that, if they don't have a way or a predetermined path towards how they're going to resolve discord like that, it can be very difficult to continue. And finally, sustained pressure. Engagement with, again, engaging the opponents, engaging government, coalition building to keep other interested parties involved. And of course, applying those principles to strategies being the overarching plans by which we make decisions and by which we determine how we're going to accomplish our goals, and the specific tactics, the steps that we're going to take. There might be things that we'll do if certain contingencies arise and whatnot. So it sounds a little bit abstract, I know. So let's sort of drill down a little bit. So common strategies, if we're dealing with, say, a government or development project, we might want to stop the project altogether. It may be the wrong project in the wrong place at the wrong time. It needs to go away. In other cases, it might just be too big, or it might be in the wrong part of the site where they want to build something. They might be looking to tear down too many trees. We might just want to modify the project. Alternatively, it might be a project that we want to support, that we think where we think the environmental benefits outweigh the detriments. So what kinds of strategies are we talking about? Well, in almost every situation, we're going to need to collect and analyze data. We're going to need to engage and educate the community about the issue and possibly about the information we've collected. And we're going to need to build coalitions of support, again, because there is strength in numbers, as we said. And we're going to need to make the case to administrative decision makers, most likely in the first instance. And of course, if things don't work out, we might need to be litigating. So we won't go through an exhaustive list of tactics. As you can imagine, they're vast and many, but examples. So we're going to grow our coalition. We're going to grow our tribe, and there's a lot of ways to do that by branding and our by branding our position, by setting up a social media page or a website. And you've seen these, involving, and we'll talk about a couple associated with some local campaigns that are ongoing right now. We'll want to publicize opportunities for action. When do we need the community to come together and attend a meeting or a hearing, or submit comments? We want to form coalitions. We may need to form an actual new group, or we may act with existing groups. And we want to develop a list of interested parties, just like Jesse talked about, adding your name to the Severn River Association list if you're not on it. We'll want to collect names and addresses, maybe email addresses for folks who are interested in our cause. And then, of course, we'll make the case through many different steps. The first one I put involves the involvement of experts. Hopefully you know a few, but if you don't, you might need to hire them. You might want to draft comments and testimony, set out a press release, issue op-eds in your local newspaper, rally attendance, as I said, at meetings, or maybe engage in protests or sit-ins. So let's jump to some local examples. So a lot of this seems sort of abstract, doesn't it? Just as a point of information, I did not represent anyone in these particular projects, but I do have familiarity with them, and then with the first one in particular, which happens to be in my neighborhood of Bay Ridge. Every community in this area has a story, and I feel like Bay Ridge has one of the best. It's a neighborhood that started out, well, I guess it didn't start out this way. It probably started out in pre-colonial times, but more recently, it was briefly a Victorian resort, and then in the early 1920s, it was carved up into 50 by 100-foot lots and subdivided. And, excuse me, I'm losing my voice here. So a large number of lots, and this photograph here represents a number of them, were undeveloped, and they were all owned commonly by a closely held family corporation. And in the late 1990s, they let it be known that they were interested in developing those lots. And if you didn't know, Bay Ridge is located at the mouth of the Severn River on the southern shore. So how did the community respond? Well, they sprang into action. We had a number of sort of forward-thinking people in the community who approached the family about selling the lots to the community so that they could put it under conservation easement. So the community formed a land trust. They purchased the land, they put it under conservation easement, which was retained by the land trust, the civic association owning the underlying fee simple. And without going into every detail of the transaction, in order to accomplish this, they had to raise a lot of money, and they had to take out loans. So one novel thing that they were able to do was to obtain financing through the state's water quality revolving loan fund, which was a fairly novel use of that fund at the time. It's an idea that's gaining traction now, but effectively it required looking at this forest as water quality infrastructure. So that was the first novel thing we did. And next, we also had to secure a loan, private financing for the remainder of the money. And in order to do that, we had to support the value of that land for a private lender. So the land was zoned as residential R2 zoning. And in order to support that value, we got building permits on 18 of those lots to establish that they were in fact buildable. Importantly, there is a provision in the easement and in the financing that if there should be a default on that loan, that the easement might be determined to be void, null and void, and of course could be reclaimed by the financier.
Could you clarify?
Sure.
You basically use collateral to gain, to.
Mortgage,
A mortgage
yeah,
on land that you were doing development proposals for, but you weren't gonna develop the land, is that correct?
that's correct.
I don't understand. Maybe-
So, so the value of the land, the value of any land, of course, has a number of components. One is what is the zoning on the land, and another important issue being whether it can in fact be developed, right? That's the value of the property. So in order to get private financing, a lender has to be able to determine the value of the land, again, part of which is tied up in the ability to develop that property. So yes, a private lender use that valuation as a basis for loaning us money to purchase the property. Does that make sense?
Absolutely not. If you can't develop the property, I don't.
No. In order to keep it undeveloped, the conservation easement.
It's the conservation easement that does.
Understood.
Well, the bank, the bank doesn't own it now, but the bank holds a security interest, right? The land, just like your home is probably collateral for your home mortgage. This land is collateral for the mortgage that we took out, or that our community took out to finance that land.
Said that if the loan wasn't repaid, the ownership sprang back to the lender.
Well,
Yeah.
it wouldn't necessarily spring back. It would be foreclosed upon, like if the lender foreclosed on your house.
Right.
Yeah.
So then, lender could then develop. in essence.
Right, the lender,
So
exactly,
the value
correct. So, another question. That's okay.
Kind of in reverse, where the landowner wants to keep a little piece of property undeveloped.
Mhm.
They can put it, that they would give it to the organization, and then deed it to a second party.
So if I understand the question, it's, could someone who owns property place it under conservation easement and then sell that property to someone else? Yes. But typically, if you have if you're going to place your property under a conservation easement, a third party entity holds the conservation easement. So in our case, again, we initially created a land trust, the Bay Ridge Land Trust, which then became the holder of the easement, and for at least a large chunk of that, like I said, there's a lot involved. There were many parcels involved in this transaction. But for the majority of the property, the Maryland Environmental Trust was a co-holder of that easement. And in subsequent years, the Bay Ridge Land Trust merged with Scenic Rivers Land Trust, which you may be familiar with. It's a more regional entity. So they currently hold they currently hold our easement. I'm sorry?
The property is undeveloped.
It currently is because it's subject to a conservation easement. Not all of it is, no. You're describing at this point, you're describing a different scenario? But you're not describing Bay Ridge, you're talking about a separate hypothetical. Yeah, why don't we talk about this offline later? Because I just want to get through this before people lose the thread. That's okay. So the property was placed under easement. It's been under easement now for almost more than 20 years. And I think I skipped a slide. So in 2021, you may be familiar, Anne Arundel County issued its most recent development plan called Plan 2040. It's the among other things, the county proposed fairly broadly to rezone land that was in conservation to be open space, which is a category that includes a lot of like parkland and outdoor recreation space. And so Bay Ridge's Big Woods was proposed to be downzoned from R2 to open space. And instinctively, you might say, who cares, right? Because we're not going to develop that property. But the reason we cared is because of this financing issue. The concern was that the rezoning of the property could create a situation in which effectively our collateral fails, that a lender determines that it no longer supports the outstanding loan and takes action to find us in default. So again, the community had concerns about the impact on our financing, also public confusion over whether this was in fact private property or some public park, and also concern over what the county's future plans might be for the property. So how did the community respond? This was really a fairly good lesson in, just as the initial preservation of this property was a pretty good lesson in initial long haul environmental advocacy. Their response to this zoning issue is also a great lesson. The community received formal notice of the proposed change as is required by code, and they immediately informed the community. So all of us who live there received notification of the proposed change. The community hired an attorney, a real estate attorney who is involved in many development matters in Anne Arundel County and Annapolis. They crafted a unified message both for internally with communications with our community, and also external communications with the county and other interested parties in the community, outside the community, sorry. They organized and encouraged community participation. So they drafted model comments for us to submit on the zoning map. They had one of our neighbors had provided technical support for anyone who couldn't figure out how to interact with the county portal. And so we were each encouraged to post a comment indicating what we hoped to happen. They also brought out or gave notice of a number of public meetings that occurred, one of the Regional Stakeholders Advisory Committee, another of the Planning Advisory Board, and finally, the County Council meeting. And importantly, they provided both the history and the documentation of the original transaction to the county. As you can imagine, in 20 years, staff in the Planning and Zoning Office has changed. And although they might have been very familiar with our original, the community's original plans to conserve that property, very few of those people are still left, if any. So what was the outcome? Well, we won. And pretty early on, stakeholder groups and the Stakeholder Advisory Committee and the Planning Advisory Board had a full understanding of what we were saying, and were in sync with what we wanted to do. So those recommendations were changed before they were presented back to the county council. And ultimately, the county council voted to retain the R2 zoning. And I believe they may have also determined that they are not going to take this action on any other conservation property, in large part because of our vociferous response. So what were the things that most led to our success? Well, again, it goes back to a lot of those things we've talked about before. Key players had already developed relationships with county decision makers. They had trust. Our Civic Association president at the time was on the Region 7 Stakeholder Advisory Committee and had been involved with in other county decision making. The community was engaged and kept up to date on the issues as we went. Another really important point is the Scenic River Land Trust was also supportive of what we wanted to do. And they were able to present the policy argument that changing the zoning in this way on conservation property was going to have a chilling effect on people's desire to conserve property, and potentially on private lenders from wanting to assist in that. Involving an attorney was very helpful. Our attorney was in the Planning and Zoning Office frequently for any number of matters, and whenever he was there, he rang the bell on our issue. Importantly, we provided a clear basis for the government to change their decision from what was proposed. And I feel like this part of that is, yes, they need to support their decisions with some level of evidence, although it's a legislative decision, so standards are a little different, but there's also I think a face-saving element there. They didn't have this information, and in fact, in a very gracious letter back to us, they said exactly, they made exactly the point that they don't have staff that have an institutional memory of the original preservation process. They did not have the 33 odd documents that reflected the nature of the transaction and how it had been accomplished, and that they were grateful that we had provided that information. As with many conservation issues, we have ongoing challenges. This is a continuing battle, right? We've got to continually update decision makers on this history. And we have to educate our own community as it changes, right? People move in and out of neighborhoods, and they have different values as they come in. I don't know if you've lived in your neighborhood for a long time, you may remember a period where everyone volunteered. And at least in our neighborhood, I feel like a lot of that has changed over the years to let's just give some money for this issue. And they may not have the same environmental values that the original group that preserved the property had. So it's important that we, as community leaders, refresh those messages and provide opportunities for community members to be really engaged in a hands-on way. So let's move on to a second example, which if that was a testament to the strength of community structures and persistence over time, this is really an example of the power of timing and the use of established environmental leaders to take your issue to decision makers that can act on your behalf. So most of you are familiar with Greenberry Point, the iconic towers that are at on the North Shore, really right across from Bay Ridge, on the North Shore of the Severn at the mouth. Those towers were important. There were 19 of them originally that were important for submarine communication from World War II through the Cold War, and they became essentially obsolete with satellite communications. So all but 3 of those were taken down in 1999, and under something called the Sykes Act, that land was converted into a natural resource conservation area that's managed to support the mission of the military. So the natural resource conservation area is the area in gray on the map. In 2022, a fence was put up around the conservation area with a small sign with a phone number to call for information. And if you called that number, they explained that that area had been proposed to be leased for a golf course. And not only had it been proposed to be leased for a golf course, but the plan was to avoid the competitive leasing process and issue a sole source lease to a particular golf course operator. A meeting was scheduled in 2 weeks to make the decision. So what happened? Well, the woman on your left, Sue Steinbrook, who happened to walk her, walk her dog in that park on a regular basis, stumbled upon that sign and called the number, and pretty quickly started a grassroots, along with others, like-minded people, started a grassroots campaign to stop the golf course and to preserve the natural resource conservation area and public access. And on this slide, you can see some of the things that they did. They started a website. I think when I captured this this image, there were 3,500 members of that Facebook page. They placed these little hand-painted rocks around town in conspicuous spots that say "Save Greenberry Point" and ask you to take a look at that on Facebook, right? But most importantly, they reached out to established environmental leaders in town, including Joel Dunn at the Chesapeake Conservancy and the Chesapeake Legal Alliance and some others. And within a couple of weeks, this was May 2022, I think by the end of May, 25 nonprofits had signed on to a letter to the Secretary of the Navy taking issue with this and making specific requests to take that option off the table. So what did that accomplish? Well, because these established leaders were able to get the ear of Maryland's congressional delegation, they were able to get language in the National Defense Authorization Act to preserve public access while also preserving the Navy's ability to lease that property to another public entity. Another thing they did was they got the county to put in a competing bid to lease the property for conservation purposes, thus evaporating the possibility that a sole source lease would be appropriate. So what does the community attribute to this, to their success? Well, luck and timing were obviously part of it. If someone had not taken the initiative of calling that phone number and figuring out what that fence was all about before the decision was made, it could have been a very different process to try and extricate the situation from a say a signed lease. The collaboration with established nonprofits, as I said, the engagement of elected officials by those trusted nonprofit leaders, a sustained media campaign, and grassroots connection with the community. The specific expertise of community members. One particular community member, a landscape architect, was aware of this Sykes Act, which imposes certain obligations on military installations to prepare integrated natural resource conservation plans, that they need to be updated so often, that the Navy had not updated this plan in time, and it had, I think, expired. And another community member was I guess it's a biologist. I'm not sure exactly what the qualifications of this person were, but they engaged in developing an assessment of biodiversity at this site, which, as one can imagine, will be valuable going forward to highlight what would be lost if this was turned into a golf course. And of course, persistent. These people are dogged. I've met one of them. The ongoing challenges, of course, it's a temporary thing. The Defense Authorization Act is a 2-year document, so they're going to be back to the drawing board shortly. They are still hammering away to get the Navy to update this integrated natural resources management plan. There have been attempts, apparently by I'm not sure exactly who, someone associated with the brigade or the Golf Association, to confuse the message by issuing golf caps that say Save Greenberry Point, and with a completely different objective and message than what's intended. Of course, a new administration led by a golf course developer could throw a wrench. And the original group, or at least some members of the original group, have formed a nonprofit to continue this mission of battling. Is this you guys? Oh,
Yeah.
oh yeah. So did I mess any of that up? Did I get pretty good? I love that. And you know what? Thank you. Thanks for coming. So defensive and friendly, I like that. That's like another. I'm so glad. So we're moving on from that, but we can absolutely, you're all here to follow up with, and that's great. So a note about opportunities. We've been talking about threats most of this time. And I just want to make the point that opportunities are another opportunity, create another inroad to public participation, as you know, from the Severn River Association's involvement and increase in activity in restoration projects. That's a big category of opportunity that is open to the community. And in particular here in counties, urbanized counties with municipal separate storm sewer permits, MS4 permits, They have requirements to retrofit so many, I guess, miles of paved area and to reduce nutrient and sediment pollution. And they're looking to do that through you. They're from private property owners, lenders of all sorts, and other project partners to get it done. So here in the county, the Bureau of Watershed Protection and Restoration leads that effort. And of course, the Resilience Authority of Annapolis and Anne Arundel County are involved as well. Excuse me. So let's move on to some basic tips. We've, and I feel like all of these tips have kind of been incorporated in the examples we've talked about. But one of the most important times to get involved is before anything happens. These guys are a great example of hopping to it when you find out that something has happened. But the best time to be involved is now, which now being a time when maybe nothing is going on in your community that requires action. Educate yourself about the laws that apply, the history of your community, the history of the land use around you, the technical requirements and rules that apply to development in the area. Educate yourself about who to contact with certain types of issues. The beauty of this is it's all on the internet. Connect with your neighbors, connect with groups like this, connect with some of the formal bodies that deal with these issues. There are established and standing stakeholder groups for planning in the county, but there's also things that just pop up on an issue basis. If you live in Annapolis, you might be aware of the property. I think they're calling it the Quiet Waters Reserve, but it was the property that the Chesapeake Conservancy originally planned to build their headquarters and to turn into a nonprofit office hub. Because that backfired, and now the county is looking at how they will use that property. They have established a specific stakeholder group and are soliciting input on ideas for that land. And they're using members of the stakeholder to reach out to their connections to solicit comments. So efforts like that only come into your line of sight if you're connected to your neighbors, if you're connected to others who are engaged. Focus your efforts. Figure out something that you really are interested in. There's a whole lot going on. It's impossible to be involved in everything. But you can be strategic about figuring out what you want to focus on, and then engage, and then actually see if you can get yourself on a stakeholders group. Obviously, join the Severn River Association if you don't already belong, and other groups. And monitor what's going on. Monitor what's going on from the government perspective. You can get on mailing lists for issues, mailing lists for projects. Find out what's going on from a governmental perspective, but also monitor what's going on in your neighborhood. Walk the trails. See if somebody's encroaching on your conservation easement. See if somebody's building where they shouldn't have built or disturbed land, or put up stakes or fencing. And when something does happen, do all of these things we've talked about. Marshal the data, build coalitions, choose your goals and choose them wisely. Identify what approvals might be necessary for what's being planned so that you can find the most vulnerable ones to assail or to support. Communicate respectfully honestly with everyone involved if you can. At some point, you may need to become more aggressive, but you will have put a lot of money in the bank by building credibility through constructive comment and respectful professional communication. And then, as we said, with a number of these, give the decision makers a reason to adopt your position. They want to help. We don't always give them the information that they need to make the best decisions for our communities. And as things progress, rinse, repeat, lather, rinse, repeat. Continue to monitor issues to see changes on the ground. Be self-aware. You can get very emotional when you're in these issues for any period of time. It can be hard to step back and have perspective on things. Consider how your views are falling on the public. Are you bringing new people on board, or are people backing away from your positions? revisit those goals, revisit your approach as necessary, and take care of yourself. So I think the message I would leave you with is that a lot of the examples we've talked about tonight, a lot of you in this room are sort of a testament to the power of small groups of people taking action and changing the world. It makes me hopeful, notwithstanding everything else that's happening in the world. The future is uncertain, but it always is. So the best thing we can do is to exercise that muscle, right? Like an athlete hitting the bike every day, you've got to exercise your environmental advocacy muscles if they're going to be toned when they're needed, when opportunity is presented, or when threats are on the horizon. So thank you again for your time. I did want to move to questions, but.
Well, thank you very much for coming.
Sure.
Appreciate it. I have a question and a quick comment regarding Greenberry Point. I'm one of the lawyers representing Conservancy, and
Great.
so I won't say anything about that.
Excellent.
That, I wanted to point
Very
out
wise.
that first is the Sue Steinbreck and her Facebook group were absolutely tremendous in generating publicity for this.
Mhm.
And it was largely due to their work that I was able to persuade my firm to take the case.
Excellent.
The publicity they brought to it. And also, I also want to thank our own executive director, Jesse Eiler, who also had some very key meetings to move the ball. And of course, William and the Friends group here, we're really excited to see what they're going to do and hand off a lot of it to them.
Excellent.
My question is, you mentioned the importance of building coalitions, and of
Mhm.
course, the Severn River Association is founded to do exactly that. We're
Yeah.
a coalition of member communities throughout the watershed. Historically, the challenge organizations like us had in advocacy, particularly in formal advocacy before a tribunal of some sort, is standing. And I'd be interested in your thoughts on how to anticipate and overcome the standing hurdle. If you'd like to have a voice before a hearing officer or
Sure. Well, the standards for standing are often in flux and may vary from place to place, but it's a terrific strategy to find the members on the ground in your organization who have some tangible connection to the property or to the site where something is planned that you have an interest in. It could be that you walk that trail every day. It could be that your property is adjacent to the site of a development. It could be any number of things that make one or more of your members, situated in a way that is different from every other member of the general public. And maybe you have some thoughts about that too. And if, as a lawyer, perhaps you're looking to bounce ideas, but maybe you have some of your own.
No, I'm not mentioning not environmental lawyers. This is.
Oh, okay.
It seems like you have a group of people who are relatively, knowledgeable about it. But again, the fact that someone kayaks on the Severn River or fishes or even owns property on the Severn River, which most nonprofits will not own property.
Mhm.
As you know, one of the first things that a proponent of development will do is try to strike parties from testifying.
Correct.
Or
Yeah.
entering appearance based on their lack of standing.
That's very true. But I can tell you too, just, my experience in the state government is if you have one person with standing, courts are very reluctant to dismiss anyone once you have that one party, because the case is going forward. And it can be a struggle. I mean, it is something that courts will look for, administrative tribunals will look for, because they realize that at the next level of appeal, if those parties don't all follow along, there may be no one left with standing to continue the case. So it's something to be vigilant about. Thank you for bringing that up. Your question?
Cases that I have seen, the standing, there's things like I on one river or.
Yes.
Watching birds or important, so all sorts of environmental values that you think, will solve.
Yes. Well, and some of those might be soft. For example, I have an interest in, I like to. The question is, do you, have you? Is there, can you present evidence of your having done that? And obviously, an affidavit, your own attestation to doing that is, if it's properly, in a proper form, is acceptable as supporting, has been accepted as supporting that. But it has to be more than just an interest. It has to have been active, some sort of active, some sort of action, I should say. Thanks.
Okay, so Jason, that concern, if there's an entire brigade of midshipmen that has standing on this example of Greenberg Point, it's their open space. And so for everything from a ruck run to the, triathlon team, they have extreme standing that wouldn't necessarily be, they couldn't exercise out there or enjoy that wild space if it was next to, the 12th tee, right? You can tell I'm a golfer talking about the 20. So
It's 18 holes, right?
yep. So if there's a big old body of folks that does not necessarily feel comfortable for obvious reasons coming forward and talking about their use of that resource, any thoughts?
Well, you can't, you don't have standing, you can't sort of assert standing on their behalf if they're not willing to participate in the matter, if that's what you mean.
Not
but,
asserting, just wondering if there's any protection for people that might anonymously say, this is an issue for me personal. I mean, lots of them, by the thousands.
Well, I mean, again, I think it may be the distinction between someone asserting standing and then you're simply providing facts about the ongoing use of the property and the
Okay.
value of it.
Okay.
So standing
Because
isn't,
that's automatically. This is.
well, you would have to figure out a way to come up with evidence of it. And I mean, if someone has observed them using that property, I mean, there's probably someone who would at least have firsthand, I mean, there's probably a website that says that here's our training plan. We will be here 3 days a week. Evidence that they've used it, photographs, there's all sorts of evidence that they have. But again, if they're not seeking to participate, the fact that people use it doesn't convey standing to anyone else.
It's not necessarily that they're not seeking to state it, it's that they are otherwise too intimidated to voice it. They
Yeah.
would seek to make that statement all day long, but they're not, it wouldn't go well.
Well, but could they be anonymous?
Yeah,
If they're
well,
allowed,
It's just tough, yeah. Anyway, that's what I got.
Yeah. I'm not sure if I can give you specific legal advice on how that might be pursued, but
Jennifer, we have a question from somebody online.
oh, cool.
It was, can a 501c3 organization fundraise for litigation?
Yeah.
Right.
Next.
And
The
then,
questions are, the questions come when 501c3 organizations want to participate in politics, in political processes.
If I could just offer a comment on the standing question, Jennifer made the point that you can't get by just by asserting that you wish to or want to use a resource in a certain way. You have to demonstrate it. And a really good way to do that these days, especially for recreational things, is to use apps that track your fitness, like Strava or something, for instance.
Oh, there you
Because that creates a digital record that you can then show, like, I've been to Greenberg Point 80 times this year. And, and you've got it written down in the metadata that's
Right.
held by somebody else. And that'll
Right.
carry a lot more water than your
Yeah.
single statement that you do it at a certain frequency.
Carry your water, no pun intended.
Right.
Yeah, and you may not have to totally gild the lily to get standing, but that information is also just valuable to the strength of your arguments and the values of the property and the value of the use of the property. But there's a lot going on. This is a case, this is a good case in point. There's so many legal processes. There's so many sort of operative documents. You've got military issues, mission, that's property that under that law is maintained for mission readiness. So yeah, there may be mission readiness issues that would be, that might be strong, but you may not get to go to court to say, this idea is better than this idea, Your Honor. That's really the purview of the Navy, as long as they're acting within their legal authority, if that makes sense. We probably can't figure out this entire issue today, but it's interesting to talk about. Anything else? Anything not related to Greenberry Point? Because I'm really glad to hear about Greenberry Point.
There was a
Yes, sir.
bill passed legislature this year, Clean Water Justice Act,
yeah.
have expanded standards in a lot of ways.
Well, yeah, the Clean Water Justice Act was proposed. And Jesse, did you guys have an involvement, any role in that at all?
No, we didn't.
Trying to remember who did. Oh, it was the Chesapeake Legal Alliance. Okay, yeah. So these groups were concerned in particular because, and just to sort of give you the background, in under federal law, citizens have standing to bring suit to enforce environmental laws in certain circumstances. Government agencies have the primary responsibility to enforce the law, and so there are provisions that require you to give notice of your intent to sue and give government an opportunity to step in and take over. But if they don't, citizens have a right to sue in federal court to enforce federal law. We have not historically had that right under state law. And it hasn't been a fatal issue because Maryland environmental laws are very, Maryland's definition of waters is very similar, broader, but similar to the federal law. So in this case, this was a response to a federal case that affected the definition of waters of the United States and eliminated from federal citizen suit opportunities certain isolated water bodies that then would not be the purview of any citizen suit in Maryland without a state law that filled that gap. And that's what the Clean Water Justice Act did. Did you have a question or you just want to bring that up? Just want to bring that up. Thank you.
I think we have time for maybe one more. There is one on.
Kick off 8 minutes. Go on. Just kidding.
Do you know of any examples of citizen, city or county
To enforce state environmental laws?
environmental laws?
Citizens suing local governments to enforce. I mean, no, but there probably are.
Fair enough. Okay.
I mean, I'm sorry, I'll say like there are certainly suits where citizens have, where groups have challenged the issuance of permits to local governments. For example, there have been a number of challenges to the local municipal separate storm sewer permits as not being stringent enough. But that's a little different, maybe a little different than what the questioner is asking.
Okay, it's a friend of mine, I'll ask her.
Okay.
All right, well, thank you all, or thank you very
Oh,
much.
you're welcome. Thank you. Thank you.
Really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
And I think that concludes our presentation. So thank
Great.
you all for coming out. We're going to be breaking down for a few more minutes if people want to stick around. If you're not in a hurry to get out to the football game. Thank you to everybody online. We'll see you next time. Enjoy your